Welcome, Magnus here. If you're into cameras and you want to find out more about the latest and greatest cameras, and specifically for video, definitely hit that subscribe button and hit that notification. I like to talk about that stuff when it comes to DSLR and mirrorless cameras specifically. Welcome. And I also have like other videos a ton. Just check out my channel. I never know how to explain what I do. But today we're going to talk about the A9III that's rumored that might be announced at CES early January. Let's talk about it. Okay, so if you don't know, A9III and the A9 series of cameras is like Sony's top of the line cameras. It's meant to compete with like the top of the line cameras from Nikon and Canon, like the 1DX Mark III and the Nikon series, I think D5, if I'm not mistaken. But those cameras themselves are amazing when it comes to sports photography. So the Sonys are supposed to be amazing when it comes to sports photography, which usually means lower megapixel count. But Sony A9III, which is rumored, is actually, as you can see here from SonyAlphaRumors.com, seems to be a higher megapixel camera. So one of the first specs that they list is that it's going to be a 50 megapixel sensor and then 8K 30 frames per second. It's almost like this is your top of the line camera. Why are you, obviously it's almost like a response directly to the Canon R5. So the Canon R5 is a 45 megapixel sensor and it does 8K at 30 frames per second. Sony's saying it'll do the same thing, but you know what? It won't overheat. It's almost like, why are you trying to compete? Which doesn't really make sense because this line of cameras has usually, at least from Sony perspective, been lower megapixels, high frame rate of burst shooting to compete with the other high camera manufacturers for sports specifically. A couple of the other interesting specs is that it won't record 8K 60. I don't think anyone needs to record 8K 60 at this point. The other specs such as EVF autofocus and so forth, which the EVF on the A7S III is incredible, is actually going to be taken from the A7S III, and the autofocus is amazing on the A7S III. So it's taking a lot of the best features from the A7S III, adding in 8K, adding in a 50 megapixel sensor, and then throwing it out there with a price tag that's rumored to be $1,500 more than the R5. What do I think of that? Well, the fact that the price tag is higher and the only major difference that you're getting is the fact that it won't overheat leaves a lot to be left out on the table. So one of the things that it hasn't spoken about at all, at least in this rumors, is will it have a faster frame rate, like 4K at 120 frames per second or better? Will it be able to do 1080p at like 240 frames per second or anything that competes with that? We don't know yet. So those are still left out there, but this camera, if it's going to compete with the R5, it has a standing chance because it doesn't claim that it has any overheating issues. So that's yet to be seen. But the interesting part of this is the fact that they're trying to compete. This almost seems like A7S III was video camera based, and yes, it did steal a lot of sales from the R5, but it pretty much capped you at 4K 120 frames per second without going that next level. And Sony always wants to be the innovator when it comes to technology. So now they're throwing in, okay, we'll do 8K, but what else will you throw in there that'll make it worth $1,500 more than the R5? That'll be interesting. Next up on their rumors are the fact that they want to do A7 IV, which will be the successor to the A7 III, in the first half. And that will upgrade the sensor to possibly a 30 to 32 megapixel sensor, and it will have a faster readout than the 24 megapixel sensor from the A7 III. The EVF is not going to have that many dots. It'll be 3.69 million dots, but it doesn't matter because they're saying that the photos themselves will be top notch and that it will have 4K 60 frames per second with a price tag of around $2,500. Does that sound familiar? I think it should, because that is the price tag close to, if not a little bit over, of the Canon R6. Granted, the specs are slightly better when it comes to higher megapixel count, which is interesting, but in that in itself, it's got 4K 60, just like the R6. but hopefully this won't have overheating, though it does not speak about overheating, at least in this article. If it doesn't have overheating, that right there is a blessing, and it's a perfect competitor to the R6. But you have two cameras being announced by Sony, the A9S, the A9III or A9S, we don't know yet, and the A7 IV. Will they be able to dethrone Canon? And I do believe that this will actually make people look at the Canon line and say, okay, I can have a cheaper alternative be Canon, or I can pay a little bit more and get that ultimate premium through Sony. So I don't think it's bad for Canon at all that Sony's announcing these. I think it'll give people a choice. Pay more for Sony, pay a little bit less with some limitations, and get the Canon. And the Canon R5 takes amazing photos. Amazing photos. I absolutely love this camera. So it's definitely, and I've been able to record 8K with no limit. You can check out my previous videos to see how I did that. And it's pretty awesome. I have not run into a situation of overheating being a problem. So it's frustrating that it does overheat, but the fact that I haven't run into it, and I've actually done professional work with it and filmed slow motion, filmed everything I needed to film, didn't run into a single issue and no worry about anything. So this is my go-to camera. Codecs could be a little tough, I have to admit that, and I've done a video on that too, but all in all, terrific camera. Anyway, that's all I got to say today. This was a quick video. Hope you guys liked it, and if you did, like I said, hit that notification, hit that like, and of course, as always, you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you guys later.